He thought he was just running from trouble. But what if I told you that a single choice, freeing a caged German shepherd from men who would have sold him to die, would lead him into something no one was meant to find? A hidden path, carved into the cliffs, a place where the desert's death gave way to life. But here's the question. Did he discover the valley, or was he led there by something greater? Because in the end, what he found was more than water, more than safety. It was a miracle, disguised as loyalty on four paws. Stay with me, because what happens next will make you question whether chance really exists, or whether God still sends us guides in the most unexpected forms. The outskirts of El Paso, Texas, lay under a blistering sun that turned the asphalt into shimmering glass and bleached the sky into a relentless, pale blue. The desert winds carried dust across the highway, scouring rusted fences and abandoned billboards that no one cared to repaint anymore. It was the kind of day when the heat clung to skin like a curse, when the scent of scorched earth mixed with the faint smell of oil and exhaust from the trucks that groaned along the interstate. In this unforgiving landscape walked a man named Ethan Miller, a figure hardened by a life that had given him little mercy, but enough strength to endure. Ethan was 31 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with a frame that spoke of years of labor and restless nights. His hair, once dark chestnut, had lightened under the sun into streaks of sandy brown. His beard was neatly trimmed, but hinted at roughness, like someone who knew both discipline and weariness. His eyes, a deep steel gray, carried the kind of calm you find in men who have seen too much yet refuse to bow to despair. Ethan's childhood had been marked by a broken home. His father, a rancher who died in debt. His mother forced to leave, taking his younger sister but leaving him behind with relatives. That fracture in his youth had shaped him into a man both wary and fiercely protective of anything that might slip away. He worked odd jobs, drifting from oil fields to construction sites, never quite belonging, but always moving. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, the type that drew little attention, yet his presence felt unshakable in a crowd. That afternoon, Ethan walked along the edge of an industrial road on the western rim of town, where warehouses sat like hulking skeletons against the heat. The cicadas screamed in the mesquite trees, and a stray dog barked at shadows from behind a chain-link fence. It was there that Ethan noticed a truck parked half-hidden by a row of corrugated sheds. Unlike the steady procession of delivery rigs, this one idled too quietly, its paint chipped, its back doors dented. His instincts, sharpened by years of mistrust, told him something was wrong. The driver was a man called Hank Dobbins, a figure Ethan would remember later for his brutish posture and eyes like wet gravel. Hank was in his 40s, heavy-set with a thick gut hanging over a rusted belt buckle, his cheeks rough with stubble that never seemed to grow into a proper beard. His arms were corded with the strength of someone used to throwing weight around, though his steps were slow and clumsy from too many beers over too many nights. Hank was known around the fringes of town as a man who dealt in things no decent soul would admit wanting: stolen tools, illegal cigarettes, and now, dogs. His companion, a wiry man called Clyde, leaned against the truck's front bumper, smoking a cigarette with the restlessness of a coyote. Clyde was thin, tall, his skin leathery from the sun, his hair greasy and tied back. His eyes darted constantly, the twitch of a man always afraid someone stronger might come for him. Ethan slowed his pace, pretending to adjust the strap of his duffel bag, but his eyes caught the faint sound, a muffled whimper. He frowned, scanning the truck. The back doors rattled faintly. He stepped closer, each move measured, until he could see through a gap in the dented panel. His breath caught. Inside were cages stacked one atop another, each crammed with dogs, mostly German shepherds. Their eyes reflected fear and confusion, muzzles pressed against steel bars, fur matted with sweat and filth. The heat inside must have been unbearable, the air thick with the smell of urine and desperation. Ethan's gaze locked onto one particular cage. A young German shepherd, perhaps 2 years old, stood pressed against the bars. His coat was a striking mix of black and golden tan. His body lean but strong, muscles rippling beneath fur dulled by neglect. His ears were pricked, eyes burning with something Ethan recognized instantly: defiance. Unlike the others that lay panting in surrender, this one refused to bow. When the dog met Ethan's stare, time seemed to freeze. There was no mistaking the silent plea in those amber eyes, nor the fierce will that burned behind them. The sight ripped something open in Ethan, a memory of his father's old sheepdog, Rex, who had stood guard at the ranch gates when Ethan was a boy. Rex had been loyal to a fault, and when the ranch went under, the dog had been sold along with everything else. Ethan never forgave himself for not fighting harder to keep him. Now, looking at the German shepherd, he saw not just an animal in a cage, but a chance at redemption. Hank spat into the dirt, muttering something to Clyde about making the next run before nightfall. Clyde nodded, grinding his cigarette into the sand. Ethan knew he didn't have long. His heart hammered as he circled behind the truck, his boots crunching gravel. He glanced around. The road was empty, the warehouses silent, the sun sinking lower but still merciless. He pulled a pocket knife from his bag, hands steady despite the storm inside him. With a swift flick, he wedged the blade into the cage latch. The metal groaned softly. He winced, glancing back, but Hank and Clyde were arguing near the hood, voices raised, too distracted. Ethan worked faster, jaw clenched. Finally, the lock gave way with a metallic snap. He swung the door open just enough. The German shepherd leapt forward, landing silently at his feet. Up close, Ethan could see the scabbed scratches on the dog's flank, the way his ribs pressed against his skin from days of poor feeding. Yet the dog stood tall, ears alert, muscles coiled with readiness. Ethan crouched low, whispering, "Easy, boy. You're free now." The dog's tail twitched once, uncertain, but his eyes softened with trust. The moment didn't last. A shout split the air. Clyde had turned, cigarette falling from his lips. "Hey, what the hell you doing?" Hank lumbered around, his face twisting into rage. Ethan grabbed the dog's scruff, urging him forward, and they bolted. Gravel sprayed beneath their boots and paws as the two men cursed and gave chase. The dog bounded beside Ethan despite the limp from his injured leg, his breath harsh but determined. Ethan's lungs burned, his heart racing, but he didn't slow. The city lights of El Paso glimmered faintly in the distance, yet ahead lay only scrubland and fading sun. A gunshot cracked, echoing off the warehouses. Ethan ducked, dragging the dog low with him. Another shot rang out, whistling past. Clyde's voice shouted threats. Hank's heavy boots pounded close behind. But Ethan knew the terrain. He had grown up running these forgotten edges of town. He veered sharply down an embankment, through a tangle of mesquite and sage. The dog followed, silent and sure, as though instinct bound them. They broke through to a dry wash, the air cooler in its shadows. Ethan didn't stop until his chest threatened to burst. Only then did he crouch, hand on the dog's neck, eyes scanning the ridge above. The voices had faded. curses carried away by the wind. He pulled the dog closer, pressing his forehead to its fur. "We're in this together now," he whispered, breath ragged. The German shepherd licked his cheek once, brief but certain, as if sealing a pact. The sun slid lower, painting the desert in blood-orange light. Behind them, the town was just a smear of dust and danger. Ahead lay uncertainty, but at least it was freedom. Ethan rose, the dog at his side, and together they vanished into the coming night. The night swallowed Ethan Miller and the German shepherd into its vast silence, the desert stretching before them like an endless ocean of shadows. The moon had risen pale and cold, silvering the ridges and casting long, sharp lines over the scrubland. Ethan's breath came ragged as he jogged along the dry wash, boots sinking into sand, every nerve stretched taut. The dog stayed close to his leg, limping slightly from an old wound but steady, his ears flicking to catch every sound the desert carried. Behind them, faint but undeniable, came the rumble of a truck engine. Hank and Clyde had discovered their escape route and were sweeping the dirt roads, their headlights sweeping across the landscape like searchlights. Ethan knew they couldn't head back toward El Paso. Too many eyes, too many questions. He veered west, toward the foothills where the desert gave way to broken mesas and dry gullies. Sweat rolled down his back despite the night chill, and the metallic taste of adrenaline coated his tongue. He carried only a small canteen, less than half full, and a pocket knife. Everything else, food, shelter, safety, was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, survival meant staying ahead. The German shepherd, despite his injuries, moved with uncanny awareness. His coat gleamed faintly in the moonlight, the black saddle across his back catching silver. He was tall, strong for his age, perhaps no older than 2 years, his paws sure even on loose rock. Ethan marveled at his resilience. Every time the dog faltered, he seemed to gather himself and push forward as though some inner compass drove him. Twice already, the shepherd had halted abruptly, ears pricked, warning Ethan just in time to duck into gullies as headlights passed overhead. Without him, Ethan would have been caught in a heartbeat. Hours passed, the desert air growing colder. The vast openness pressed on them both, the silence broken only by coyotes yipping at the moon. Ethan's legs burned, his lungs seared, but he forced himself on, one hand always brushing against the shepherd's neck to reassure them both they were not alone. At last, when his body threatened to collapse, he spotted a shape against the horizon, a derelict water tower, its iron skeleton leaning against the night sky like the bones of some ancient beast. Beside it stood a shack, no more than a ruin, but shelter nonetheless. Inside the shack, Ethan crouched among the splinters of rotted wood and broken glass, the shepherd lying close against his side. He listened for the hum of engines, nothing but the hiss of wind through cracks. For the first time since the chase began, he let his guard drop. He cupped water from his canteen into his palm and offered it to the dog first. The shepherd drank greedily but stopped halfway, nudging the rest back toward Ethan. Ethan's chest tightened. "You're smarter than I thought," he murmured, voice hoarse. "Smarter and kinder than most men I've known." Just then, footsteps crunched outside. Ethan froze, his hand closing around the knife. The door creaked, and a figure appeared in the moonlight. A woman stepped into the ruined shack, her lantern throwing yellow light across the floor. She was tall and slender, in her late 20s, with long dark hair braided over her shoulder and skin bronzed by years under the Texan sun. Her clothes were plain, a faded flannel shirt tucked into worn jeans, but her bearing was steady, cautious. Her name, he would later learn, was Sarah Delgado. Sarah was the daughter of migrant workers who had toiled in the cotton fields outside El Paso. Life had taught her to read danger in men's eyes, to trust only what her hands could hold. She had come here searching for a stray goat that had wandered from her family's smallholding. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted Ethan crouched in the corner, the German shepherd bristling beside him. She raised the lantern higher, revealing high cheekbones, sharp brows, and a mouth pressed thin in suspicion. "Who are you?" she asked, voice even but edged. Ethan kept his voice low. "Just passing through, no trouble meant." The shepherd growled softly, his body tense between them. Sarah studied him for a long moment before her gaze softened at the sight of the dog's wounds. She knelt slowly, careful not to spook him. "That's a fine animal. Doesn't look like he's had much kindness lately." Ethan weighed his options. Telling her the truth meant risk. But something about her presence, calm, unflinching, cut through his instinct to lie. "He was locked in a cage," Ethan admitted. "I couldn't leave him. The men who owned him, they'll come looking." Sarah's lips tightened. She knew the type. Rumors of dog runners had spread across the county for months. Men who snatched pets and strays alike, selling them for fights or worse. Her brother had lost a hound that way last year, and the memory still simmered in her chest. She nodded once. "Then you'd better keep moving. This land won't hide you long." Still, she rummaged in her satchel and pulled out a strip of dried jerky, tossing it gently to the shepherd. He sniffed, then devoured it in 2 gulps, tail thumping faintly against the floorboards. For the first time since the chaos began, Ethan smiled. "Thank you." Sarah gave a shrug, straightening. "Don't thank me, just stay alive." She left as quickly as she came, lantern bobbing into the darkness. Ethan leaned back against the wall, exhaustion hitting him like a wave. The shepherd curled against his side, warm and steady. Ethan stroked the dog's head, whispering, "We'll keep moving at dawn. Together." He closed his eyes, the sound of his companion's breathing anchoring him against the storm outside. Somewhere beyond the desert ridges, Hank and Clyde were still hunting. But under the cold light of the moon, Ethan realized something profound. This dog wasn't just a rescued life. He was a partner, sharp-eyed and loyal, whose instincts might save them both. And perhaps, just perhaps, the bond between them could be the compass pointing toward survival. The dawn broke harsh and red across the desert, painting the sky with streaks of fire as if the land itself bled under the sun's gaze. Ethan Miller rose stiffly from the corner of the ruined shack, every muscle aching from the chase of the night before. His steel-gray eyes were heavy with fatigue, but the German shepherd pressed his cold nose into Ethan's palm, nudging him to stand. The dog's ears twitched restlessly toward the east, as if something unseen beckoned. Ethan drained the last swallow from his canteen, the metallic tang of old water doing little to quench his thirst. He knew the odds were stacked cruelly against them. The desert did not forgive weakness, yet the shepherd seemed certain of some direction, stepping forward with a steady determination that felt more like instinct than chance. They left the shack behind and trudged through sand and stone, following a dry arroyo that cut across the land like an old scar. The sun climbed higher, cruel and relentless. Ethan's boots filled with grit, his throat cracked, and his lips bled faintly from dryness. But the shepherd pressed on, nose to the wind, body taut with focus. Ethan found himself trusting the animal more than his own fading strength. Several times he stumbled, knees buckling, and each time the shepherd circled back, nudging his side with firm insistence until Ethan found his footing again. By midday, the land began to change. The flat stretches gave way to ridges studded with jagged rock. The air carried a hint of something Ethan had not felt in days. Coolness, faint but undeniable. His heart quickened, though his reason warned against false hope. Heat mirages often tricked desperate men into believing they saw rivers where none existed. Still, the shepherd moved with certainty, tail high, ears pricked, his amber eyes scanning ahead with almost human conviction. As they climbed the first ridge, Ethan spotted movement along the horizon, buzzards circling lazily in the thermals, their black silhouettes carved ominous patterns against the sky. He knew Hank and Clyde might still be out there, relentless in their greed. The thought pushed him faster despite the fire in his lungs. The shepherd gave a short bark, then darted toward a narrow fissure between two boulders. Ethan followed, squeezing through jagged stone that scraped his arms raw. The path twisted upward, a natural staircase of sharp ledges. Rocks crumbled underfoot, tumbling into the canyon below, but the shepherd leapt with surprising grace, his injured leg straining yet refusing to fail. At last, Ethan hauled himself over the final ridge, chest heaving. What lay beyond stole his breath. Spread before him was a valley cradled by cliffs, hidden from the desert plains like a secret locked in stone. Green unfurled in every direction, grasses bending in the breeze, cottonwoods and sycamores shading a ribbon of water that wound through the heart of the basin. Birds flitted in flashes of blue and crimson, their calls rising in joyous contrast to the silence of the desert. At the far end, white spray thundered where a waterfall tumbled from the cliffs, feeding the stream below. Ethan's knees nearly buckled at the sight. The shepherd barked again, bounding forward despite exhaustion. Ethan followed, stumbling down the slope until his boots sank into cool, damp grass. He dropped to his knees and pressed his hands into the earth, the smell of life, rich, loamy, undeniable, flooding his senses. For the first time in days, hope was not a cruel illusion. The shepherd waded into the stream and plunged his muzzle into the current, drinking deeply. Ethan leaned forward, cupping his hands in the water, lifting it to his cracked lips. It was cold, sweet, and pure, each swallow a rebirth. He gasped, splashing his face, letting the water run down his beard and wash away the dust of despair. They rested beneath the shade of a willow tree that spread its branches like an old guardian. Ethan leaned against the trunk, his body finally unclenching, his heart pounding not with fear but with awe. The shepherd lay at his side, head resting on Ethan's boot, chest rising and falling in calm rhythm. Ethan stroked the dog's fur, noticing how the sheen returned with each hour in this place. "You found this," he whispered, voice thick with gratitude. "You saved us both." The dog's tail gave a slow, deliberate thump against the grass, as if he understood. Exploring the valley, Ethan found thickets heavy with berries, their juice staining his fingers dark purple. He plucked fruit and fed some to the shepherd, laughing softly as the dog chewed with eager relish. Deer tracks lined the stream bank, and rabbits darted into underbrush at their approach. The waterfall roared ceaselessly, its spray casting a rainbow into the sunlit mist. To Ethan, it felt like stumbling from a tomb into a cathedral. As twilight fell, painting the cliffs in violet and gold, Ethan and the shepherd lay near the pool at the waterfall's base. Ferns and wildflowers carpeted the ground, their fragrance sweet after days of dust. Ethan stared into the spray, his mind turning over the strangeness of it all. How many wanderers had died within a mile of this paradise, never knowing it lay hidden just beyond stone? He thought of Sarah's words, her warning that land could not hide them forever. Yet here, surrounded by life abundant, the fear ebbed. For the first time in years, Ethan felt not hunted, not broken, but alive. That night, under a blanket of stars shielded by the high cliffs, Ethan built a small fire of driftwood gathered from the stream. The flames licked upward, crackling softly, and their glow danced on the shepherd's fur. Ethan tore the last of his jerky and shared it, piece by piece, with the dog. As he leaned back against a rock, warmth spreading through his limbs, he realized that his fate had shifted. He had been running from death, and instead he had found life. With the dog beside him, loyal and tireless, he belonged to this hidden valley now. Whether by chance or by grace, the valley had embraced Ethan and the German shepherd, with a gentleness neither had felt in years. But the next morning, as the mist rose from the waterfall and the sun spilled gold through the trees, Ethan realized they would need more than food and water if they were to remain here. A stream could quench thirst, berries could dull hunger, but a man and a dog could not live forever in the open, exposed to every storm, every predator, and worse, every man who might stumble upon the valley. He rose from the grass, his body stiff but spirit steadier, and followed the narrow trail that wound deeper into the basin. The shepherd trotted at his side, his coat already brighter after just one day, his limp easing, though not gone. It was there, beyond a grove of cottonwoods, that Ethan saw it, a cabin slumped against time but still standing. The roof sagged inward, shingles scattered like fallen leaves, and the windows gaped hollow, black as eyes that had seen too much. Vines crept up its frame, twisting over the warped wooden planks. The front porch leaned dangerously, one step broken clean through. Yet despite its ruin, Ethan felt a pulse of life, as though laughter still clung to the air, as though once, long ago, children had run across those boards, while smoke curled from the chimney. Cautiously, he stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under his boots, sending dust spiraling through the sunlight that slanted between cracks. A rusted stove crouched in the corner, its belly split with age. A chair lay collapsed near the hearth, its back splintered. On a table warped by moisture, an old lantern leaned sideways, its glass shattered. Bird nests filled the rafters, and mice darted into the shadows as the shepherd padded in, nose twitching. Ethan placed a hand on the doorway, tracing initials carved faintly into the wood. J+M, 1917. Whoever they were, they had lived and dreamed here before the desert claimed them. The shepherd barked softly, tail swishing as though he too sensed the place was more sanctuary than ruin. Ethan crouched and rubbed the dog's head, smiling faintly. "We can make this ours, old boy, if we're careful." His steel-gray eyes scanned the walls, measuring, planning. He had worked construction long enough to know how to brace frames, patch holes, repurpose what the land offered. He could mend this place, give it breath again. For the rest of the day, Ethan set to work. He cleared vines from the porch, tore down what could not be saved, and scavenged stone to shore up the gaps. His hands blistered, his shoulders ached, but each nail he drove into weathered wood tethered him more tightly to the valley. The shepherd remained close, sometimes lying in the shade, sometimes trotting into the underbrush only to return with sticks or scraps of bone, his amber eyes bright as if eager to help. Ethan laughed aloud more than once at his companion's insistence, the sound strange in his own throat after so many years of silence. But Ethan knew danger lingered outside the cliffs. Hank and Clyde were not the kind of men to surrender easily. He remembered the echo of their curses, the bark of their pistol, and the hunger in their eyes. They would be searching still, not only for profit, but for pride. That night, as he sat by a small fire inside the half-repaired cabin, Ethan kept his rifle across his knees. The shepherd lay at the doorway, head on his paws, ears flicking at every distant sound. Twice, coyotes yipped beyond the cliffs, and once, Ethan thought he heard the distant growl of an engine. His stomach knotted, but the cliffs held. No light broke through the pass. No footsteps disturbed the valley's hush. Still, Ethan did not sleep. Over the following days, the cabin took shape beneath his hands. He scavenged driftwood from the stream, stones from the ridges, and even stripped bark from fallen trees to weave crude repairs for the roof. His palms split and bled, but with each bandage tied, each board hammered into place, the ruin became a shelter. He found an old axe head rusting in the dirt behind the cabin, and with a handle carved from sycamore, it became his tool again. The shepherd thrived beside him, eating berries, chewing scraps of rabbit that Ethan managed to snare, his coat sleek, his gait steadier. Ethan named him Shadow, for the way he followed silently but always near, like a guardian spirit. The dog accepted the name easily, ears flicking whenever Ethan called, tail wagging low and steady. One night, as storm clouds gathered and lightning forked across the cliffs, Ethan stood at the doorway of the cabin, Shadow pressed against his leg. Rain hammered the roof, seeping through holes he had not yet patched, but inside, the fire held. Ethan raised his hand, palm open to the night, and whispered into the storm, "I'll keep this place. I'll keep you safe. I promise." The words were not only for Shadow, but for himself, for the land, for whoever had once carved those initials into the doorway. He had lost too much already: his family, his father's ranch, his sense of belonging. But here, in this hidden valley, he felt something rise in his chest and that he thought had died long ago. Purpose. Weeks passed, and the cabin grew strong again. Smoke rose from its chimney once more, drifting into the sky like a declaration. Ethan planted wild seeds near the stream, crude rows that he hoped would sprout. He stored berries in woven baskets, fashioned crude shelves from planks, and swept dust from corners until the place smelled not of ruin, but of wood smoke and earth. At night, he leaned against the wall with Shadow beside him, rifle across his knees, and when the distant sound of an engine growled beyond the cliffs, he would move silently to the pass, dragging brush across the trailhead, piling stones to disguise the path. The hunters would not find them, not easily. If they did, he was ready. The valley had become his sanctuary, the cabin his shield, and Shadow his brother in arms. And Ethan, for the first time since boyhood, felt not like a wanderer, but like a man with something worth fighting for. The days bled into weeks, and the valley began to shape itself into something more than just refuge. With every nail hammered into the cabin's patched walls, and every seed pressed into the moist soil near the stream, Ethan Miller felt the weight of his past loosening. He woke each morning to the murmur of water and the whisper of leaves, no longer to the sound of footsteps chasing him across barren dust. The German shepherd, Shadow, as Ethan had named him, no longer limped but moved with powerful strides, his black and tan coat gleaming with health. His eyes, once shadowed with fear, now burned with alert intelligence and quiet contentment. The valley was alive in ways Ethan had forgotten the world could be. Wildflowers painted the meadow in yellows and purples, Rabbits darted through the brush, and hawks wheeled overhead with sharp cries. Ethan tended the rough garden, pulling weeds with calloused fingers, humming songs half-remembered from boyhood. Shadow would lie at the edge of the rows, head lifted, ears twitching to every distant sound. At dusk, they walked the perimeter together, Ethan carrying his rifle slung across his back, Shadow moving like a silent sentinel. The man and the dog were no longer fugitives scraping through survival. They were guardians. But peace never came without its edge of fear. One morning, while filling a bucket at the stream, Ethan noticed boot prints pressed into the soft mud near the cliffs. They were fresh, too fresh to dismiss as old. His heart stilled. Shadow stiffened beside him, hackles rising, nose testing the air. Whoever had wandered close had not yet breached the valley, but the message was clear. Their sanctuary was fragile. Ethan dragged brush and stones across the narrow pass again, disguising the entrance as best he could, and spent that night awake on the porch, rifle across his lap. Shadow stayed at his feet, his body tense until dawn. No intruder appeared, but Ethan knew the outside world pressed closer than he wished. It was on a late afternoon, the air heavy with the sweetness of ripening berries, that Ethan found himself standing with Shadow at the base of the waterfall. The thunder of the cascade filled his ears, cool mist dampening his shirt, sunlight catching in the spray like shards of glass. Shadow bounded ahead, leaping into the shallow pool, splashing water that glittered as it fell back. Ethan laughed, a raw, surprised sound, and crouched to scoop water into his palms. Watching the dog, he felt a sudden wave of gratitude so fierce it nearly drove him to his knees. He remembered the cages, the despair in Shadow's eyes when they first met, and the gunfire that had chased them into the night. That memory collided with the sight before him now. A strong animal running free, tail high, spirit unbroken. Ethan dropped to one knee, his steel-gray eyes stinging as he reached forward. Shadow bounded back, water dripping from his muzzle, ears perked. Ethan wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, pressing his cheek against the thick fur, the smell of earth and rain in it. His voice was hoarse, almost broken when he whispered, "You're not just the dog I saved. You're my family." Shadow's tail thumped against the ground, slow and certain, and for a moment, the valley seemed to hush around them, as though recognizing the vow. Ethan carried that realization with him into every small act afterward. When he repaired the corral so Shadow could roam without straying too far, he did it not for convenience, but for care. When he smoked fish caught from the stream, he set aside the best cuts for Shadow first. At night, as the fire burned low, he found himself speaking aloud, telling stories from his childhood, about his father's ranch, his sister he hadn't seen in years, the way the stars used to look when he lay on the prairie as a boy. Shadow would rest his head on Ethan's boots, eyes half closed, but his ears always listening. It felt, for the first time in Ethan's life, that someone was hearing him fully. Seasons shifted. Early frost painted the edges of the meadow, and Ethan gathered firewood until his shoulders ached, stacking it high against the cabin wall. Snow dusted the cliffs, turning the valley into a world of silver and silence. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, casting long shadows across the patched walls. Ethan would sit at the rough table, a tin cup in hand, while Shadow lay near the door, his breath steaming in the cold air. The outside world, with its cruelty and hunger, felt distant now. In its place, there was belonging. There were dangers still. Once, a mountain lion prowled near the stream, its eyes glowing in the dusk. Ethan's rifle cracked, and the beast fled into the ridges. Shadow stood firm beside him, body rigid but fearless. Another time, a rattlesnake coiled near the cabin steps, but Shadow struck first, pinning it with a swift paw until Ethan ended it with a blade. Each trial only deepened the bond between man and dog, two survivors shaped by hardship but bound by trust. One night, beneath a canopy of stars that seemed endless, Ethan sat on the porch with Shadow pressed against his side. He looked out over the valley, the silver ribbon of water, the dark embrace of trees, the cabin standing proud once more. His chest swelled with something he had not felt since childhood. Peace. "We'll keep it safe," he murmured, his hand buried in Shadow's fur. "This valley, this life, it's ours now." Shadow lifted his head, eyes glowing in the starlight, and let out a soft, steady bark, as if agreeing. For Ethan Miller, once a drifter haunted by loss, and Shadow, once a caged animal waiting for death, the valley was no longer just a place to hide. It had become home. And in the thunder of the waterfall and the silence of the stars, Ethan knew the truth would never change. He had not simply rescued a dog. Together, they had found a family. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come as gold or riches or victories shouted from the mountaintops. They come quietly, in the form of a loyal companion who refuses to leave your side, in the shelter of a hidden valley, in the strength to stand back up when the world tried to break you. Ethan thought he was saving a dog, but in truth, God had sent that dog to save him. And isn't that how life often works? In our darkest deserts, when we feel forgotten, God places a light before us, sometimes on 2 feet, sometimes on 4 paws, to remind us we are never truly alone. As you go through your own days, remember this. Family is not only blood, and miracles are not only ancient stories. They happen still, in loyalty, in love, in small graces that whisper of God's presence. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave us a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so more stories of courage, love, and faith can find their way to you. And may the Lord bless you and keep you. May He watch over you and your loved ones, now and always. Amen.